This is a reminder that I have not been giving to all of you, especially my everydayers out there, frequently enough, that a group of 5 team is going to make the playoff. And unfortunately, that's where Oregon State essentially find themselves right now. Carter Bahns covers the Beavs over at beaverblitz.com, also writes for 24/7 Sports, joining me here on the show. Oregon State had their spring game on Saturday at Corvallis, Carter, and there were some positive takeaways, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, where the Beavs are expected to be stronger, but the quarterbacks did not exactly wow anybody the way Aiden Childs did a season ago.
I think that is kind of the perfect encapsulation of the Oregon State spring game. It was a defensive affair, very, very few points scored. The winning team, the scoring metrics and whatnot in the spring games and the timing and everything is off. But a 10-7 ball game is defensive one way or the other. When you get into the different ways that you score these things. And for the quarterbacks to have such a shaky performance, I don't know is entirely indicative of where this team stands, just because you're working in new guys who are coming in through the transfer portal. You're working in a brand new coaching staff, minus, just maybe 2 or 3 position group coaches off the top of my head. And generally just a lot of uncertainty. And again, like you're still putting everything together. You're still putting the pieces together. So it's a spring game. Everything's vanilla. You've got all these new guys. How much can you read into it? I don't know. But the bottom line is there has to be improvement between now and the season, because if that is the product of Oregon State that you see in week 1, that is not a college football playoff contender. That is not a team that's going to go out and beat all of its Mountain West competition. The Beavs need to be better than they showed. I think they will be, just because it's a spring game and it's very early in this process, but not good enough.
Yeah, and Jabari Johnson comes over from Missouri. Giovanni McCoy comes in from Idaho. Ben Gulbranson still on the roster. Those are the quarterbacks Oregon State has to work with in 2024. And right now, I would look and say, okay, if Oregon State's going to be a playoff team, which they absolutely could be, they'd have to win 11 or 12 games. And now that would be a difficult feat to achieve, no doubt about it, but impossible with their schedule? No, I don't think so. Our friends at FanDuel haven't given a win total there, but I'd imagine it's probably in the 8.5, 7.5 sort of range if they were to churn one out. And there are quality opponents on the schedule. And you look at the way they can, build up wins. It's not out of the realm of possibility whatsoever. Now, they're not going to be a conference champion, of course, because they don't have, a conference to play in really at the moment. But none of that matters, Carter, if you can't get better production out of the quarterback. So do you think that one of those 2 newcomers via the transfer portal stood out so far for Oregon State? Or is this just seemingly an open battle?
It's an open battle. Jabari Johnson didn't even practice for much of camp. He was still working his way back from an injury of some sort. I want to say he practiced about 4 or 5 times, came back and played in the spring game, and frankly, at times just looked lost. He was one of the guys who I thought was most impacted by that defensive pressure. Giovanni McCoy, nothing special in the spring game. Ben Gulbranson didn't play, and then Dom Montiel, the walk-on, was probably the most solid of the quarterbacks, and you ideally don't want to see a walk-on be the best of your quarterbacks. Now, Oregon State is very well known for producing former walk-ons, turned scholarship players, turned stars. Jonathan Smith, obviously a walk-on himself. As a player, Katano Ladapo is probably going to be hearing his name called here in a couple of days at the NFL draft. So, Oregon State could be fine theoretically if a walk-on comes out and shines, but that's not what you want to see in your spring game. It's not what you want to see when you're standing here, 5 months away from week 1. So again, I think part of it comes back to these are quarterbacks who are trying to learn a system, who are trying to get acclimated to new receivers that in Johnson and McCoy's case, they don't know because they're coming in from new schools. They've only been here for 2 months, 3 months at most. And you're still piecing that together, and then you add in the element there with Johnson only practicing a couple of times. You would expect to see the defense a few steps ahead of the offense at this point in the process.
So Oregon State has not had a great go of it in the transfer portal, not just with their football team, but really across their athletic department because of all this realignment craziness. But it does feel like things have kind of stabilized for now. And, Damian Martinez, that's a big name. He's still in the transfer portal looking for a home. Miami's rumored to be kind of the leader there. At least that was the last update that came out on that front. And certainly I've talked here on the show about how great of a fit I think Martinez would be with the Hurricanes and Mario Cristobal's offense. But what has Oregon State done to try and, fill the void that they didn't know until very recently Damian Martinez is leaving behind?
Well, there's not much they have done, but I expect now with camp over and camps finishing up across the country, and you're going to potentially see a little more transfer portal movement here in the next week. I think this is where Oregon State becomes active. This past week was all about guys entering. This is the time now, as practices conclude, as coaches have more time to hit the recruiting trail, that you're going to start to see guys commit. And I am curious to see where Oregon State goes, running back in particular, because they already got Anthony Hankerson in the previous window from Colorado, who I think has the chance to step in right away and be the starter. He and Jam Griffin, I think, are going to be a pretty nice two-headed attack for Oregon State. I think could be the next great Oregon State two-headed running back attack. It seems like the Beavers have had one of those every year for, just about the last 20 years now. So I don't necessarily know that they're in dire need at running back, but I am curious to see how they approach that situation, because at the very least, you're losing depth because everybody has to step up a spot when Martinez leaves. If Hankerson was going to be your second or third guy, he's your first or second guy. That moves everyone up, and now you have another space on your depth chart that you need to fill there. But I think the other positions are where Oregon State is probably going to emphasize. I would like to see them go out and get another receiver. Defensively, of course, getting some depth on the front is always a priority at Oregon State, because it's a position group that, frankly, they just don't recruit particularly well from the prep ranks. So again, I think these next couple of weeks is where Oregon State hits it hard. Scholarship wise, they have more guys than they can really hold, but I think you'll see movement go in and out here over the next week as this portal window hits week 2 of 2.
Does Oregon State have the ability right now, with the schedule they have and just kind of the entire vibe around the program and, kind of an aura of uncertainty, which, I've said before, makes this season all the more important? Like, if you go out and go 10-2 this year, if you're Oregon State or Washington State for that matter, I think that really helps legitimize the status that you do have, right? It's not as good as it was. You can't get to that level at this point in time, but to make the best of it, you have to, be able to put a product on the field that's appealing to players across the country. But what is the pitch right now to go play for Oregon State football?
Well, the sell is very clear. Trent Bray made this clear from essentially the minute he landed the head coaching job, is that at Oregon State moving forward, you have a chance on an annual basis to make the college football playoff, because all you need to do is be the best group of 5 team, be the best team outside of that traditional power conference structure. And, we can talk down the line about how that looks 2 years from now, but for these 2 years, all you got to do is just be the highest ranked team outside of the Power 4 conferences, and you're going to have a seat at the table. And that's the sell. It's, if you're a high enough,
well, but for the next 2 years specifically, it's highest ranked group of 5 conference champion. Oregon State and Washington State would be looking at an at-large spot, which, as I said, because of the quality of their schedules, they've both got Oregon and Washington on there. You win those games and a couple other Power 4 games, and you win, only lose one time. 11-1 with quality wins, that at the very least will get a look.
Yeah, you're very important semantics there. College football playoff expansion is just wild. But yes, anyways, the sell there is that you still have a chance to compete at the highest level. And in some ways, you have a path that could be seen as favorable, because Oregon State has the resources and, probably the coaching resources and the talent base, at least right now, to compete at a really high level in the group of 5 ranks. Oregon State right now, even with all of its departures and all of its coaching change, still has a roster, an athletic department, a football program, and the resources that it needs to compete in the upper half of the Mountain West at a bare minimum, if not the very top of the Mountain West right away. And that is something that I think you can sell to someone who, again, going back to this second half of the portal window, someone who maybe at a Power 5 or a Power 4 school hears, you're not really in our starting plans this year. Oh, I'm going to go enter the transfer portal. Oh, here's a team that I can compete right away. I know that I have a starting spot at this school, Oregon State, and we're going to win a bunch of games. Like, I think that's really appealing to kind of a bounce back type player, which Oregon State has been a destination for in the past.
Carter Bahns, Beaver Blitz, and 24/7 Sports, the latest from Corvallis. Carter, thanks for stopping by. Good to see you, man.
Thank you. Yep, thank you.
Some of those transfers I've talked about recently have found homes. We'll check in on them.